The British Prime Minister Theresa May returns to London with a Brexit extension. She now faces the challenge of getting Parliament to support her deal, which they've already rejected twice. 1 month since the protest movement began, thousands of people are once again taking to the streets across Algeria, demanding the immediate resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. And following the call by US President Donald Trump to recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, the EU says that call undermines the chances of peace. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom here in Paris. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We begin with the latest on Brexit. The British Prime Minister Theresa May is now back in London, following on from her latest visit to Brussels, during which she managed to secure an extension for the Brexit divorce deal. Well, the UK had been due to leave the bloc 1 week on from today, but it's now going to depart on May the 22nd. That's if Theresa May's deal is accepted by the British Parliament. If they reject it again next week, then Brexit will go ahead on the 12th of April. Well, the Prime Minister says that she will make, and I quote, every effort to win over support from MPs who've already rejected her deal twice. Well, at this hour, we're keeping a very close eye on Brussels because we're expecting the French President Emmanuel Macron to speak at any time, and we'll take you to Brussels just as soon as he speaks. But let me begin here in the studio with our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert. Doug, just looking at the front pages of the British newspapers this morning, I mean, they're not being kind to Prime Minister Theresa May, many of them suggesting she's had the timetable for Brexit sort of snatched away from her by Brussels.
Well, it was in the sense that she did not get the timetable that she had requested. She had wanted a delay until the end of June 30th. And in the end, she's not getting that. She's getting even under the lengthier possibility, the scenario under which on the third go around, the Parliament were to finally approve her deal, which seems very unlikely from where we stand today. If that were to happen, she'd have until May 22nd to tie up all those legislative loose ends, get the whole thing through Parliament and ratified and Brexit on May 22nd. It's the other date, that April 12th date, which is more interesting because it is essentially the EU seizing control of this process. And the EU leaders, if they haven't been completely explicit about it, at least, privately, there's a sentiment among many of them that watching Theresa May, and especially during the questioning yesterday, there was a lack of confidence based on her own, what they sort of saw as her evasiveness, her dodginess, her vagueness, at her own inability to really deliver on anything at this point that she says she'll deliver on, and i.e. getting that vote through Parliament, but also coming up with any alternative scenario with any sense of coherence for the European leaders, with a level of a comfort level for them in the event of a rejection of her deal and a looming no deal. And that's exactly the European leaders, essentially what they were doing during the summit at the outcome of these 7 hours of grueling talks during which, by all reports, the European leaders themselves were very much divided among themselves until taking this harder line, trying to basically save Europe and to circle the wagons, so to speak, around European interests ahead of these crucial European elections, and not wanting Brexit and the absolute shambles of the Brexit process and the toxins of British politics, British domestic politics, to spill over, to leak into and contaminate Europe's own politics and Europe's own political scene at a very critical juncture.
Yeah, of course, they've got lots of other things to be thinking about in Brussels.
Right.
Having spent 2 years or more tussling over Brexit. I mean, people are fed up, aren't they, with Brexit? In the UK, they're fed up. Across Europe, people are fed up. And just, listening to what's coming out of Brussels in terms of what the various leaders are saying, I mean, they want this over and done with. And none perhaps more so than the French President Emmanuel Macron, who's sick of this dragging on.
Yeah, it's interesting using the term sick of it because Emmanuel Macron is in a sense right now become the heavy, that is the hardliner, promoting a position that perhaps his heart, at least initially, wasn't entirely in because, let's remember, Emmanuel Macron really wanted Britain to remain in Europe, believed that Britain played a critical and vital role within Europe, Macron himself being a proponent of closer European integration at a time where that's not necessarily the political flavor of the day, but he's been an ardent, staunch Europe supporter and believed that Britain was very much a part and component of that integrated European order. He's also been very in the past dismissive of these types of referendums where he says they all seem, he said during one of the great national debate, they all seem seems so innocent and sweet on the surface. Why not give the people a say? And we see the types of things they result in. He's been very critical of the Brexit referendum itself of June 2016, saying it's been manipulated a lot of times by outsiders with a lot of false information, bad information, with toxic results. And now everyone's basically having to deal with the catastrophic, if you will, fallout from this process. So he was someone who wanted Britain to remain. But watching this process, along with the rest of his 26, not counting Britain, European leaders, watching Brexit unfold or devolve, if you will, into the shambles it has become, he basically says he's calling time. He's saying basically Britain now has to take its own responsibility. It's not up to Europe to solve Britain's own domestic divisions and issues. We're going to give you a little bit of breathing space. We're going to give you that 2 weeks if you don't approve this plan. But after that, it's up to you. And perhaps, not saying so, perhaps there are European leaders hoping that Britain will use that time to break some sort of impasse, perhaps come to their senses in the views of some, perhaps ask for a longer extension, and perhaps ultimately revoke Article 50, that is, i.e. canceling Brexit altogether. We're not there yet, not by a long shot, but perhaps that is one of the scenarios in the backdrop.
Yeah, very difficult business, isn't it? Predicting what's going to happen next in this long, drawn-out saga. Thank you very much indeed, our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert. Let's move on to some other world news now. Thousands of people across Algeria rallying once again this Friday. They're demanding the immediate resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Well, every week for the past month, there have been large numbers of people taking to the streets across the country, saying that the whole political system has got to be overthrown. Well, President Bouteflika, who's 82 years old, has promised that he won't stand for a fifth term in office. Well, for more, our correspondent Lamia Ashouch joins us from Algiers. Just bring us up to speed on what sort of numbers of people are taking to the streets this Friday.
We don't have a clear number yet, just because the protest started right after the Friday afternoon prayer, which was roughly an hour ago. But definitely today's numbers are expected to be a little bit less than the previous weeks, just because of the weather conditions. It's really cold and really rainy and windy in Algiers today, and that's the only reason why maybe the numbers would be a little bit less than we are used to see. But this week is the fifth week in a row of protest against the regime and President Bouteflika specifically. We want him, or the protests want him, to step down immediately, as you said before. But what's specific also about this week is that the people are saying no to some political parties, some in the opposition, but others that were notoriously pro-government. They're saying no to them because the past week, most of them have come out and said that they are supporting the popular uprising, which was a surprising move considering their long history of pro-government stances. And so it's clear that these these parties are riding the wave. They don't want to be on the wrong side of history, because I think it's clear by now that the popular uprising is big enough to overthrow the regime at some point, and so people are riding the wave. And so people, the protests today, the banners, the slogans that we're going to see in Algeria today are saying no to political parties, trying to join the protest movement, and by extension trying to claim the protest movement as their own, which is not the case, obviously.
OK, so just to recap, Bouteflika has said he won't run for a fifth term, and in fact he's on track, we understand, to step down in the weeks ahead. I mean, is there any talk at this stage as to who might replace him? Is there any discussion of succession planning, or any figures emerging as to who could be a viable replacement?
I would say this is not a topical topic in Algeria now, just because we don't know when the president is stepping down. What we know for sure is that the elections are canceled, and that the president is still going to be the president way past the election date until the organization of another presidential poll. We don't know when this is going to be, so we don't know when he's going to step down. And so the slogans are still calling for him to step down, instead of looking for a substitute or somebody to replace him. And so, to answer your question, no, there is no clear person right now that is a fourth runner, and that people are gonna, have consensus about. We don't have that yet, because our demands, the demands of the protesters, are not yet met. This is the fifth week in a row, and we don't see any changes, any signs that the regime is gonna cave in, if I can use this word. And so what's noteworthy is that the protesters are refusing any type of organization for their protest movement, just because they don't have faith in any political figure, be it from the government or even other political figures. Hello?
Yeah, we're still here, absolutely, listening in. I was just going to jump in and ask you one last quick question, Lamia. I mean, are you seeing any protests at all? I mean, have you seen any of these last couple of weeks supporting Bouteflika and supporting the sort of the status quo, really, in terms of the political machinery that's in place there in Algeria?
Well, no. Outstanding. It's outstanding, but no, we haven't seen any pro-government protests or any pro-government, signs of support from anybody, really. I told you before that even the pro-government parties that have been, even the president's own political party, the FLN, the ruling party, said that they support the popular uprising now. How do they support it? I don't know. But they said that they want change and that they are for change. And so no, before we used to see some pro-government anti-protest, notably during the fourth mandate of the president, but these were clearly fixed by the government. These were people that most probably have been paid by the government. This time, the popular uprising is so huge, it's so big and so noticeable that there hasn't even been any counter protest to voice support for this current government, who is visibly crumbling with the passing of each day.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. Journalist Lamia Ashoush in Algiers, thank you so much for speaking to France 24. Moving on now, the European Union has added its voice to the debate surrounding the Golan Heights. This follows the call from the US President Donald Trump to recognize Israeli sovereignty over that territory. Well, Brussels maintains its position is in line with international law in not recognizing Israel's claim to that area, which it's occupied since 1967. Meanwhile, the Gulf Cooperation Council has expressed disappointment at President Trump's call, which it says undermines the chances of peace.
Thank you, America.
A welcome policy shift from President Donald Trump. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed a historic moment for his nation.
First, he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the U.S. embassy here. Then he pulled out of the disastrous Iran treaty and reimposed sanctions. But now he did something of equal historic importance. He recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights.
In an earlier tweet, President Donald Trump said the Golan Heights was, quote, of critical strategic and security importance to the state of Israel and regional stability. He's the first American president to recognize the Jewish state's sovereignty over the region. The Golan is a rocky plateau covering some 1,200 square kilometers, sandwiched between Lebanon, Israel, Syria and Jordan. Israel captured it from Syria during the Six-Day War of 1967 and formally annexed it in 1981. Other governments, including the US, did not recognize the act. Today, Syria continues to claim sovereignty over the region, and much of the international community considers it to be occupied. Trump's announcement came as US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited Jerusalem on Thursday, a trip that takes place just weeks before a crucial election in Israel. The US has made no secret of its support for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's facing a tough battle for re-election. Trump and Netanyahu will hold a working meeting in Washington next week, followed by a dinner at the White House.
Okay, and the death toll is continuing to rise, following on from Cyclone Idai, which is now known to have killed at least 242 people in Mozambique, 259 in Zimbabwe, and in Malawi, 56 people are believed to have died in the heavy rainfall before the full onset of that cyclone. Well, relief agencies and officials say that those numbers are likely to rise further still. A massive rescue operation is underway there, but shortages of food and water are making matters even harder for people living in the affected areas, where thousands of people are battling for their survival. Well, that brings us up to date with the world news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us here on France 24.